Member Ms. Jorita Fernandez to make her contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, may I proceed?
Yes, I said so a minute ago.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, I listened to my colleague on the other side, Mr. Siraj. Mr. Speaker, I am convinced that Mr. Siraj is yet to read the 2022 budget. Mr. Siraj went on to say, and I quote, "This budget should have been named non-oil and gas budget." The first budget in this nation's history to utilize the revenues from the Natural Resource Fund, Mr. Siraj stood in this house and said, this budget, Mr. Siraj, honorable member, stood and said that it should have been named the non-oil and gas budget. Uncertainty, right? Mr. Speaker, Mr. Siraj further spoke about the price of planting. And again, I am convinced that Mr. Siraj has not gone to the market in a very honorable member, has not gone to the market in an extremely long time. The price of planting is not something that the coalition was speaking about. The price of planting was an issue that the nation was speaking about. Mr. Siraj also said, Mr. Speaker, that the opposition is in panic mode. Mr. Speaker, the opposition is not in panic mode. The nation is in panic mode. The vulnerable members of this country is in panic mode. The single parent is in panic mode. Everyone in Guyana that is not a part of that clique is in panic mode. That is the panic that we are experiencing in a nation today. Mr. Speaker, it was Mark Twain that said, never argue with stupid people. They will drag you down to their level and then they will beat you with experience. Mr. Hamilton has left the House, Mr. Speaker. However, Mr. Hamilton, honorable member. Oh, he's here? Mr. Hamilton, honorable member, took it upon himself to launch a personal attack on me in his presentation on Monday when he opened for the government side of the House in their debate. Sir, the most astonishing thing about Mr. Hamilton is, honorable member, is yet to be known. Sir, the records of great politicians that walk these lands knows not the name of Joe Hamilton, honorable member. It is unbelievable, sir, that someone that spent decades in politics find it fitting to come to this house and his presentation for a budget, sir, he see it fitting to make sure that he launched an attack on a young female parliamentarian. Must I enlighten this house, dear sir, and enlighten Mr. Hamilton, sir, the decade-old politician in the House, that my political career started a mere 5 years ago. And the latter part of that 5 years, sir, I've been sitting as a member in the National Assembly. Sir, you found it fitting to insult me because you said, you believe, rather, let me quote him. He said he thought about it all night, that I am tasked with shadowing Dr. Ashley Singh. He thought about it all night, sir. I didn't say that, he did. Mr. Speaker, I am not surprised, and rightly so, he thought about it all night, sir. Because it is in those quiet moments that you, Mr. Joseph Hamilton, honorable member, it is in those quiet moments when you do not have your colleagues to prop you up. It is in those moments that you reflect on the political failure that you are. Miserable, incompetent, sorry excuse of a politician, sir. Mr. Speaker, in my last budget presentation, sir, when speaking to the non-oil GDP, I quoted, sir, was the APNUAFC's accomplishment in building a strong economy in 2019 so overwhelming that it will take the PPP until 2023, 3 years in office, as the Caribbean's largest oil producer, to finally match the economic output of the APNUAFC's final year in office? So that was a direct quote from my presentation in 2021. Sir, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Dr. Ashley Singh, responded, and he said, sir, that I did not know what I was talking about. Yet, Mr. Speaker, the said minister stood right here in this very house last Wednesday and delivered a report card to this nation that not only confirmed what I said, sir, but he delivered a report card of total and utter failure to the people of this nation. The minister reported, sir, that in 2021, non-oil GDP growth was an anemic 4.6%. After a projection that the said minister made in this very house, sir, of 6.1% in 2021. After, sir, that had suffered a contraction of 7.3% in 2020, sir. And further, Mr. Speaker, the minister gave the projection for 2022 as 7.7%. And again, I project an epic failure to meet the target for this year as well. For the member that is shouting, due to his ignorance to the matter at hand, let me explain further, sir. The Honorable Mr. Kwame McCoy that is shouting, I am simply saying, sir, I'm going to take the time to explain it to you. You met the economy here. In 2020, it contracted, it went down here, sir. 7.3 contraction. You projected, sir, your government, sir, projected that in 2021, it would have had a growth of 6.1, sir. They did not meet that target, sir. They met a target of 4.6, sir. You think you're following, sir? That is what is going on. Mr. Speaker, we have witnessed the PPP miss 2 GDP growth targets in 2 budgets, sir. Not only have they missed every growth target since they came into office, sir, but they missed both by miles. They have missed every growth target and they have missed those targets by miles, sir. In 2020, the Honorable Minister projected, like I said, the GDP would contract between 1.4% and 4.3%. Then, when presenting in 2021 budget, he reported that the economy actually contracted by 7.3%, sir. With that failure on his record, he then projected GDP growth of 6.1 in 2021, sir. 6.1, that is what he projected, sir. Sir, with this failure on his record, sir, I think 6.1% was a very modest sum, which fully took into account the COVID-19 pandemic, I dare add, The PPP is coming to this house, speaker after speaker, and speaking about their failure and trying to sugarcoat it and trying to blame the COVID pandemic. So I want to remind this house that the COVID pandemic was already upon us when those projections were made at the beginning of 2021. So that is not an excuse for the drastic failures that was reported here, sir. Modest as it might have been, sir, modest as it might have been, it was clearly not modest enough to overcome the legendary incompetence of the PPP. The Honorable Minister came to this house just last week to report that instead of the 6.1 projected growth, Guyana has recorded a GDP growth rate of only 4.6. With another significant failure on his record, he then proceeded, like I said, sir, that the ending of this year, he is going to realize a non-oil GDP growth of 7.7%. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm willing to take any bet that the PPP is going for the hat trick. With 3 failed GDP growth targets in a row, sir. Let us all assume, for the sake of argument, let us assume, sir, that somehow they will get their act together and finally deliver on a promise, just one promise, sir. Let's say the economy actually grew by 7.7% in 2022, non-oil economy I refer to, sir. As unlikely as it is, sir, that would amount to an average GDP growth of 1.47% over the 3 budgets executed by the PPP. These are the people who attempt to lecture to us. Then they come to this house and they speak of transformation. They come to this house and they say they know to do it best. This is what they have delivered. Failure upon failure. Let's talk about inflation, sir. Big topic at hand right now. Every media house is reporting on inflation. The people of this country is crying out about inflation. As I turn the nation's attention to another target that the PPP has totally failed to meet, they have a trend of missing targets since they came back in office, sir. In his 2021 budget presentation, the Honorable Minister within the Ministry of the Presidency with responsibility for finance, Dr. Ashney Singh, projected that there would be a 1.6% inflation in 2021, sir. He then came back to this house, the Honorable Member, and reported a 5.7% inflation rate for 2021. Mr. Speaker, 5.7% is over 3.5 times his announced target. And the projection was made in light of COVID-19. COVID-19 is not an excuse for this failure to meet this target. I pause and wonder how a government could be so utterly incapable of hitting a single one of their targets. Targets that they set, sir. This is not targets that the opposition set. The opposition didn't set targets. They set targets. They said based on their competence, they will make these things happen. Failure, failure, failure. This is all that they have delivered to this nation, sir. Mr. Speaker, when this budgetary period ends, at the end of 2022, the PPP would have presided over a total inflation rate of over 11% in just 2.5 years. This is taken into account, sir, the projection from the Honorable Dr. Ashney Singh. A cost of living increase, sir, of $11,000 on $100,000 budget, sir. Where is the average worker and pensioner going to find the money to meet this spike in the cost of living? In the budget, sir, the biggest budget ever, a budget that drains the NRF fund, the pensioners will receive an increase of $3,000. This is a relief that this uncaring administration offers, when by their own projection, sir, they would have presided over an inflation of 11%, Since they assumed office, they are now giving the pensioners $3,000, sir. And these are the people that want to scold us on management of the economy. What a joke. Their own report, sir, reeks of economic mismanagement. Sir, let's turn our attention to corruption. The PPP loves to speak about corruption. My friend Yvonne, yes. My friend Yvonne was very honorable member, Miss Yvonne. She spoke about the numbers don't lie. Sir, let's go to corruption. Mr. Speaker, the 2019 CPI, the Corruption Perception Index, sir, stated, and I quote, 2019, sir, with a score of 40, Guyana is a significant improver on the CPI since 2012. 2012, sir, just for the reminder, the PP was in office in 2012. While there is still much work to do, the government has demonstrated political will to hold former politicians accountable for the misuse of state resources. That was reported under the APN UAFC administration, sir. Not only did that statement acknowledge the misuse of state resources under the PPP, but it went on to show how the policies of the APN UAFC was geared at correcting systems they met in place to rid the nation coffers, sir. The PPP come to this house, sir, and talk about corruption. What a joke. What a joke. In 2012, sir, under the PPP, Guyana had the highest ranking in corruption ever in this nation history, sir. Under the PPP, they presided over that, sir. However, sir, the PPP wasted no time after they assumed office in 2020, sir, to set backup system to raid the nation's coffers. In 2021, sir, the Corruption Perception Index now was forced to drop Guyana's ranking by 2, sir. We are 2 rankings worse off than they took this country in 2020, sir. And they want to speak about corruption? What a joke. What a joke. Let's meet. This is the budget, sir. I know you don't understand that, but this is the budget, sir. Taxation, sir. Taxation, sir. Mr. Speaker, one of the most boosted tax adjustment in the 2022 budget is the removal of the 2% withholding tax on resident contractors, sir. It's right here, page 5, in their little abstract, sir. Number 1D, remove the 2% withholding tax on resident contractors, sir. But, Mr. Speaker, we are only left to assume. Sir, we are only left to assume that this tax reduction is simply a redirection of those funds from the coffers at GRA and into the pockets of the gang that is raiding the nation coffers, sir. And sir, we have evidence of this, sir. Sir, we have evidence of this, sir. The honorable member, as I must refer to him, sir, Mr. Kwame McCoy, shouting across, how is this possible, sir? I will remind the honorable member, Mr. McCoy, I don't think he follows the news, sir, that it is their PS that a sting operation was set up against. It's their PSs before the court for what? You remember what? Corruption, sir. Corruption, sir. Yet the PPP comes to this house and they try to scold us on management. Sir, speaker after speaker, the PPP have come to this house, sir, and they have talked about track record. What did you do? That's what they said. What did you do when you were in office? Each and every member of the PPP. Mr. Speaker, we have listened to all of them from the government side stand up and speak on track record. And we have heard them, and we have heard them ask the question, what did you do? And I stand here to remind those on the other side with their shallow memory, sir, of our track record. And more importantly, to enlighten them, sir, of their own track record since assuming office in 2020. Because it is clear, sir, that they were partly deaf. I believe they were partly deaf, sir, when the honorable member, Dr. Ashni Singh, was actually delivering his presentation, sir. The honorable member stood in this very house last Wednesday and delivered his report card to this nation. Let's talk about track record. Don't get distracted, sir. He delivered a report card that he repeatedly was forced to grade his administration and his ministers in the various sectors and ministries. F, F, F. Failure, 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 sir. We can look at the very presentation, sir, starting from page 7. This is the document that was read by the Honorable Minister within the Office of the President with responsibility for finance, Dr. Ashni Singh. He spoke to sectorial performance, sir. This is developments in the domestic economy in 2021. This is not the coalition going out there and saying that they failed, sir. This is them reporting the numbers of failure. The Minister of Finance reported an F in agriculture, forestry, and fishing sector. He said, Mr. Speaker, that sector contracted by 9.1% in 2021. Not grow, sir. This comes after he had estimated the sector to expand by 5.6% in his previous budget presentation. Simply put, sir, he came here at the beginning of 2021 and he said that they are good and they are competent and they can deliver and they're going to use the resources well. And he said at the end of 2021, this sector would have grown by 5.6%. Sir, his report card said that it contracted by 9.1%, sir. The minister went on to say that the sugar growing subsector had reduced by 34.7% in 2021 and delivered a total sugar production, sir, of 58,025 tons, sir. Simply put, in 2020, sir, this subsector produced 87,875 tons. Mr. Speaker, it is after the minister stood in this house last year and I said, and I want to quote him here, sir, the restructuring of Gaisuco, because they came, sir, and they spoke about Gaisuco. I think it was every speaker that spoke about Gaisuco, if I'm not mistaken. They came to this house, sir, and they spoke about Gaisuco. And I'm quoting from the minister 2021 budget presentation, sir. He said the restructuring of Gaisuco alongside the recapitalization of sugar estate will see improved production and productivity, not only in 2021, but over the medium term. As a result, in 2021, the sugar industry is projected to grow by 9.6%, end of quote, sir. He is now trying, sir. He is here and he is trying to blame the failure to reach this target on the flood. But sir, even that, sir, if you were to calculate by his own admission, the numbers that he projected within this very report, sir, if you are to do the calculations as to the loss that they ensued due to the flood, Mr. Speaker, you would realize, sir, that even if you subtract from that number that they projected, sir, they would have still fallen short tremendously. But you know what is most astonishing, sir? And persons need to understand this. Even with the worst projections that we have encountered thus far, even with their failure to meet any one of these targets thus far, Mr. Speaker, The honorable member proceeded to give a projection for 2022 for this subsector as 65,000 tons. I want Guyanese to understand what we're saying. The PPP come to this house, speaker after speaker, and they say they will rescue sugar. They came to this house and they say that we did not know what we were doing when we were in office. They came to this house and they say that they will reopen the sugar estates. Sir, the PPP is now by their own admission, sir. The PPP is now by their own admission. It is a barefaced admittance, sir, that they know that sugar is failing. These are the people that stand in this house to lecture us. People who 3 budgets later is yet to bring up production of sugar to where we left it off in 2019, sir. Sir, no estates will be open. Mark my word. Absolutely no estates will be open. And tens of thousands of jobs, the tens of thousands of jobs. I want to touch on Mr. Mustafa. He's not here, sir. I will still continue. Mr. Mustafa stood in this house, sir, yesterday, and he said when they're finished with the work, they will be creating avenues for tens of thousands of jobs. Tens of thousands of jobs, you know. Mr. Speaker, it should be a crime for a sitting minister to randomly pull numbers out of the sky like that. Just to inform this honorable house, the unemployment rate, these are the numbers, the unemployment rate for the 3rd quarter of 2021 was reported by the Bureau of Statistics at 14.5% in comparison to the 13.1% in 2019. Simply put, more persons were employed under the coalition that are employed today. The APN, UAFC did not talk. We delivered. We employed more persons. That is what the number said by the Bureau of Statistics. You can go and challenge that if you will, sir. Mr. Speaker, I repeat to further make it clear. It is a statistical fact, sir, proven by the hard work of the Guyana Bureau of Statistics that there are more people jobless today, unemployed today, than there were under the APN, AFC administration time in office. This is the cold, hard fact beyond debate, sir. Those are the numbers, Mr. Pearson. As you rightly said, numbers don't lie. Mr. Speaker, the minister continued. The minister continued to read his failed report card that the PPP got an F in rice production also, sir. According to his report, sir, this is his report, there was a reduction of 20.5%, resulting in 860,000 tons of paddy production in the rice growing sector for 2021, sir. This was after the minister stood in this house and projected production to increase by 3.5%, another missed target, sir. The PPP continues to miss their targets. And let me remind this nation, sir, that it was under the APN UAFC administration that paddy production was at its 2 highest, with 2015 being the highest and 2019 being the second highest, both years recording well over 1 million tons of paddy, sir. We do not need you to lecture us on the rice sector, sir. We have delivered. This is a track record. You asked a track record, I'm delivering that track record to you. Let's look at the extractive industry, sir. Let's look at the extractive industry, sir. Mr. Speaker, the report card for the extractive industry is another F. Another F, sir. Bauxite mining declined by 3.8%. F. Gold mining contracted by 14.8%. F. With the combined output from large operators declining by 31.7%, sir. F, F, F. And let me remind this nation that under, sir, since we're talking about track record again, sir, let me remind this nation of the track record for the extractive industry under the APN UAFC administration, sir. 2014, sir, the last year of the PVP being in office. 2014, sir. 2014, sir. Gold declaration was 387,000 ounces. Mark this number, listen carefully. 387,000 ounces, 2014. The coalition came into office in 2015. Guyanese, you're listening. The first year of the APN UAFC in office, gold declaration, sir, was 451,000 ounces. 16.5% increase, sir. That's our first year in office, sir. Let's move to our second year in office, sir. 2016. 2016, sir. May I continue?
Thanks, Honorable Member. Honorable Member, you will need some time to conclude.
Mr. Speaker, I do move that the honorable member be given 5 minutes to conclude her presentation.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Member, you may continue to conclude.
Thank you, sir. Let me recap it for persons that missed that. PPP left the office in 2014, their last year in office, rather, in 2014. We had the declaration of gold being 387,000 ounces. The coalition came into office in 2015. We had the declaration of gold, 451,000 ounces, 16.5% increase. Sir, 2016, the second year of the APN UAFC being in office, 713,000 ounces, 58% increase, and they tried to school us on extractive industry. What a joke. A mere 2 years of being in office, the APN UAFC had an increase, sir, of 326,000 ounces. That, my friends, account for almost 85% increase. So do not attempt to lecture us on gold. Mr. Hamilton don't understand, sorry, Honorable Member, Mr. Hamilton, and we know why. Mr. Speaker, the report card as delivered by the Honorable Member, Dr. Ashni Singh, is a dismal report of failure. A report card that fails to reach any target that was set by their own administration, not by us, sir. A report card of failure presented to this nation. And yet, sir, they come to this house and shout and scream with their incompetence. Empty barrels, indeed, make the most noises. This budget rips through the very soul of this nation, a nation that was hopeful. This hope is now lost. The abomination, sir, which the PPP calls a budget, lays out a plan to add a further debt burden, sir, of $100 billion while emptying the natural resource funds of $126 billion, sir. Mr. Speaker, let me put that into context for my friend that need me to put it into further context for him. The PPP has outlined, sir, a plan to place a debt burden of $476,000 on the shoulder of every Guyanese family, while they also withdraw $600,000 per family that was saved in the NRF fund, sir. I know you didn't do that calculation, sir. Sir, $1,076,000 per every Guyanese family. $90,000 a month per every Guyanese family, sir. That is what the PPP has done to this nation. This, sir, is more than enough to immediately end extreme poverty in Guyana and make hunger and homelessness, sir, a distant memory for the thousands of Guyanese who are struggling in the depth of extreme poverty in this nation, sir. Yet you can search until the end of this budget period, sir. Sir, you can search forever and you will not find a single policy within this budget that actually address extreme poverty. This is the budget that the PPP come to this house and claim to be a caring budget. This budget, the biggest budget ever, $552.9 billion. The first budget to use the oil revenues after it would have been fully implemented at the end of this year. There is still absolutely no relief for the poor. There will still be a plastic city, sir, in Region 3, their stronghold. There will still be families struggling in Tiger Bay, sir. There will still be children begging on the streets. There will still be homeless people sleeping on every road corner in this city. After the biggest budget ever, listen carefully, the first budget to utilize our oil revenues, Guyanese will still be struggling to survive. Poverty, the lack of basic human needs will continue to plague our most vulnerable under this careless, heartless, immoral, and inhumane budget. Single mothers struggling to provide for their families, sir. Pensioners who are no longer able to work. The sick and the disabled. These are these people who make up the bulk of those who will suffer in extreme poverty in this country. This budget does absolutely nothing to raise their standard of living. Mr. Speaker, I believe it is not too much to ask that in a country set to have the third highest oil production ever, per person, when the Liza Unity comes online in just a few weeks, this 2022 budget should have outlined a plan to end childhood hunger. At the very least, sir, is it too much to ask that there be a plan to get thousands of children living in squatting areas, provide them with emergency housing, sir? Is that too much to ask? Is it too much to ask that our pensioners be given enough money in the biggest budget ever, the first budget to utilize the NRF funds? Is it too much to ask that you give them enough money so that they can afford 3 healthy meals a day? For the PPP, sir, this is too much to ask. For the government of the day, it is least among their concerns, sir. Sir, they are more concerned with projects and programs that will yield the biggest kickbacks. Sir, as I wrap up, how do we expect a minister who traveled via bus for the first time when he was 30 years old and he had to take a camera crew, sir, to film his experience? How do we expect him to understand the needs of persons? How do we expect him to understand poverty? How do we expect him to understand that $3,000 addition after draining the nation's oil resources is nothing close to being enough for our pensioners? How do we expect him to understand that, sir? Mr. Speaker, the PPP seems to be filled with two extremes. On one hand, they have people that do not care. And on the other hand, sir, they have people that do not understand. So what we have, sir, is a situation in which persons that do not care is actually leading persons that do not understand. That is what is going on there, sir. Sir, I will say in my final statement, sir.
Honorable member, I will have to stop the final statement because I've been signaling you for the past 3 minutes to conclude. I'll give you 30 seconds.
Thank you, sir. Much obliged. Sir, in my final statement, I would say that if I was to name this budget for the PPP, an accurate name for the budget would have been trickle-down economics again. We promise it will work for you this time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, honorable member. Honorable members, before I call on the next speaker, I am not going to raise the finger anymore at speakers. When it's 2 minutes on your original presentation, I'll raise this white pen because I hear a word being used by the honorable member, Mr. Duncan. I'm asking you to desist from it, right? And for your 2-minute warning.
Imagine from the 1960s to now, we have multiplied in terms of transportation. the people of East Berbice Quarantine is asking for a new highway, not to rehabilitate the existing one. We know that. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, budget speech, referring to budget speech section 411, the honorable member made mention to the rehabilitation of 4 vessels which will facilitate the traveling public. It is also critical for the movement of people and cargo. Mr. Speaker, I wish to say this afternoon in this honorable house that you are saying that you will facilitate the traveling of the public, which is critical, and this same PPP administration down 2 of the speedboat that were traveling, transporting people, old people, pensioners, children, working people from Rossignol to New Amsterdam. How can you bring into a budget now to say that you will put in place 4? And we had 2. You didn't maintain it. You just pull it out. Mr. Speaker, this is putting our brothers and sisters both in New Amsterdam and Rossignol, Region 5 and Region 6, very high cost. They have to traverse the Berbice Bridge, which costs them approximately $300 to cross one time. Mr. Speaker, if these 2 boats were maintained, serviced and maintained, then the Guyanese people, our Barbician to be specific, would have been very, very much impressed. Mr. Speaker, I have not seen in the budget any major transportation for the people of Baracara. Also no upgrade for transportation to Uriala Siparuta. Mr. Speaker, I wish to turn my attention to health in East Berbice Quarantine. For the past 18 months, we have not seen the construction of any new health center, but we are faced with the rundown service that we are having at many of the health facilities. I wish to say that if was not the private medical facilities, then Region 6 would have been in a bad state. Mr. Speaker, we have just passed a bill which we will be involved in organ transplant and tissue transplant. But we have not put in this budget, Honorable Speaker, an infectious disease hospital for Berbice or Essequibo. Thanks to APNU AFC government, the infectious disease hospital was built in Region 4, and it was used for, it has been of great service to the people of Guyana. We are asking now that the people of Berbice and the people of Essequibo need an infectious disease hospital as well, sir, so that we will be able to have state-of-the-art medical facilities. Mr. Speaker, page 47 of the budget reads, our clear policy mandate is that every health facility across the country must be sufficiently comfortable with functional and equipped with the basic amenities. We want to move from that, Mr. Speaker. The people of East Berbice cannot settle for basic amenities in the health facilities. The private institutions are too costly. That is why each health center, each hospital in region number 6, sir, must have not basic amenities, must have the best amenities so that the people can be able to enjoy ECG machines, cholesterol testing machine, X-ray machine, ultrasound machine. All these must be at all the health centers and the public facilities so that the people will have. Mr. Speaker, we have had part of this without oil. But now we have the natural resource funds, so we are appealing so that the health minister, the honorable health minister, can put systems in place so that the people of East Berbice Quarantine will benefit from the money that belongs to all of us. Mr. Speaker, I wish to turn my attention to education, a very important ministry for the growth and development of any nation. I wish to say that the cash grant initiative is a good one, but I wish to further state that the amount allocated to the children is not enough. We are proposing that it can be amended that this budget we should have at least $40,000 for our school children, so that we will be able, the children of this country, the children of East Berbice Quarantine will be beneficiaries of the funds from the national.
Honorable member, the amount missed me. Could you just repeat that for me? The amount you're saying?
40,000, sir. Thank you. Sir, Mr. Speaker, in looking at our neighboring country, Trinidad is an oil-producing nation, sir, and all school children have free lunch there, sir. So we now have a newfound revenue. Why is it that we are only catering for a portion of our school population as it relates to meals? It will be good for the 174,000 of our children. All of our children receive meals supplied to them. Mr. Speaker, we're studying food for the children by. Mr. Speaker, 1.2 billion is set aside for textbook and science kits, sir. We are asking that we are moving in a technological era, and 1.2 billion for textbook. We know that our children have been receiving textbooks for the past 15 years. And textbooks are things that do not, disappear. It stays in the system for many years. We are saying, let us try to put more money into the electronic and computerized system so that our children can have preload tablets or computer or gadgets and be anywhere in the country and utilize the services. We know that we are moving in a technological era, and our children do not have the internet access. But we want our children to receive the gadgets so that they can be anywhere. Once they have electricity, they can charge up, have all the schemes and the notes and the exams, papers, past papers, and everything there, so that they will be on par with the children. All the children will be on par with what is happening in education. Mr. Speaker, it is evident that the PPP will not provide more public transportation for our children. We have not seen that in this budget, Mr. Speaker, and I want to appeal to the Minister of Education, the Honorable Minister of Education, and the Honorable Minister for Finance to ensure that we have at least 100 big buses in this country. Without oil revenue, Mr. Speaker, without oil revenue, we had 30. We had 30 big buses transporting our children across the country. And according to the Honorable Minister, Nigel Dharmalal, now we have oil money. It will be very good for us to ensure that we have at least 100 buses that all our school children, 174,000 of our school children, can travel to school free. Mr. Speaker, as it relates to transportation at the East Berbice Quarantine, to be more specific, East Bank Berbice. East Bank Berbice, Mr. Speaker, we had a 60-seater bus there in the East Bank Berbice area, bringing children from Mara to New Amsterdam. And we know that things tight. And we know that the people in East Barbies quarantine suffering. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable, Mr. Speaker, the members of the PPP administration scrapped that bus, claiming that the bus has mechanical problem, an engine problem. But lo and behold, Mr. Speaker, the engine disappeared from the bus. Apparently, the engine got to somebody else, you know? So, it is causing the parents of East Bank Barbies, Mr. Speaker, at least $1,000 a day to bring their children to New Amsterdam. Mr. Speaker, the 25 plus 5,000 that they will be receiving is just 1 month transportation. We are asking the Ministry of Education to put systems in place so that the people in the East Bank Barbies will have at least $190,000 a year, so that for the 39 weeks they can have transportation to go. Mr. Speaker, I wish to say the sugar workers in the Skelling area, they had a bus too. And you know what happened? The PPP scrapped it. They had a bus. Without any resources, without any newfound oil monies, the people in Skellen had a 60-seater bus that used to transport the children from Skellen to the schools in the area. Region 6 bus, Region 6 school bus, sir. You know, I know you have a problem with the color of the bus, but you know, it would be better if you paint it in red and you know, let it continue to rule for the people. Now,
An honorable member, it would be good if we give you an extension so that you can conclude.
Mr. Speaker, I do move that the honorable member be given 5 minutes to conclude his presentation.
Thank you, honorable member. You may continue and conclude.
thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying about the Skellen transportation in the Skellen area, Mr. Speaker, without the oil revenue, we know that the people in Skellen was having a difficult time. 60-seater bus was provided. The PPP scrapped it. We are having oil now, Mr. Speaker, and we are hoping that the Region 6 children will receive the various subsidies so that they can be able to go to school free. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I wish to say that we are not seeing any reduction in the Barbies River Bridge, the toll for the Barbies River Bridge. Mr. Speaker, I wish to bring to the attention of the House that it was the APNU AFC who subsidized $300 for every car or bus traveling the Barbies Bridge. With oil revenue now, we are not seeing it in the budget, Mr. Speaker, that the Barbies River Bridge price will drop to $1,000. The people of Region 5 and Region 6 will be happy if tomorrow the PPP says we will drop the Barbies River Bridge toll to $1,000. Mr. Speaker, we are appealing that the minimum wage should be 100,000. Workers of all category and all class should have at least 10 to 50% increase. Tax threshold be moved to 100,000. Cash grant be moved to 40,000. Subsidies be given to the small businesses up to 5 million. Increase of public assistance from 12,000 to 20,000. Drop the Barbies Bridge to 1,000. And Mr. Speaker, in closing, just imagine our senior citizens receiving $100 a day, token given from the PPP administration. $100 a day from oil revenue. Mr. Speaker, a loaf of bread in Barbies costs $3.40. You know? Mr. Speaker, giving pensioners $3,000 a month, which is $100 a day. Oil revenue Guyana, giving our old people, our old folks, who have worked all their life for this country, $100 a day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, honorable member. I now call on the honorable member, Dr. Vishwa
free, where the mind is without fear, and the head is truth. Grant us, O God, the hidden guidance, so that we may deal justly with the several causes that come before us, laying aside all private interest, prejudices, and personal preferences, so that the results of our counsel may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion, the preservation of justice, meant to that state of brotherly unity, where the mind is empowered by thee in the ever-widening thought and action.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Messages from the President. Announcements by the Speaker.
Honorable members, yesterday there was a very horrific accident promotion was on road usage. Honorable members, today, on a more pleasant note, I know I have your support in extending birthday salutations to our former clerk, Mr. Frank Narain, who today is 90 years of age. Happy birthday, Frank. And a reminder to the Committee of Supply, we have the consideration of the time for the allocation of consideration for the estimates at the first suspension. Honorable members, our first speaker today, sorry, go ahead, Sherlock.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers and reports, etc. Reports from committees, oral questions without notice, questions on notice, statements by ministers including policy statements, personal explanation, requests for leave to move the adjournment of the National Assembly on definite matters of urgent public importance, motions relating to the business or sittings of the National Assembly and moved by a minister, introduction of bills, public business, government's business.
Honorable members, we will now resume the debate on the budget speech for 2022. Our first speaker today is the dashing Duncan, the Honorable Member, Sherrod Duncan.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues all, thank you for a very elegant introduction, Mr. Speaker. You know, I had meant to refer to Shakespeare a little later on in my presentation, but as the Speaker offered such generous words, I think I must be very careful when I'm quoting Shakespeare in the National Assembly. I think a passage from one of those literary texts says that these couchings and lowly courtesies might fire the blood of an ordinary man. Be not fond that Caesar bears such rebels' blood. Mr. Speaker, I am appreciative of the opportunity to add my voice to this great debate. I wish to recognize the sterling contributions of the members of the parliamentary opposition, the depth and breadth and the sheer substance they each added to their presentation. We are the better for it, Mr. Speaker. I wish to recognize as well the efforts of our colleagues on the other side of the House for their contributions to what the honorable member within the office of the President with responsibility for finance, Dr. Ashni Singh, was courageous enough to call a national budget. Mr. Speaker, I look across this arena of the National Assembly at the 33 MPs on the government side, and I feel, I confess, a little bit underwhelmed. It is only symptomatic of getting accustomed to looking out into the void and having thousands of persons looking back at me. Yet, all our colleagues on the other side of this House are honorable men. Knowing the honorable member Charles Ramson's love of Shakespeare, again, I must choose my allusion to Shakespeare, honorable men with care. Reading this budget, Mr. Speaker, reading the consternation of the public in reaction to it, one knows all too well, feeling the pain of the small man, that when sorrows come, they come not as single spies, but as battalions. Yep. Mr. Speaker, allow me to extend a metaphor. There's a passage in Shakespeare's great literary text, Julius Caesar, that reminds me of this great scene before us. For there he was, noble Mark Antony, given leave by Brutus to eulogize the murdered Caesar. I rehearse Antony's words. Did this Caesar seem ambitious? When that the poor did cry, Caesar wept. Ambition should be made of sterner stuff. Yet Brutus says he was ambitious. And Brutus was an honorable man. You all did see on that leprechaun, I thrice presented him with a kingly crown, which he did thrice refuse. Was this ambition? Yet Brutus says he was ambitious. I'm sure he, Brutus, was an honorable man. I speak not to disprove what Brutus spoke, but here I am to speak what I know. You all did love him once, not without cause. What cause which holds you to mourn for him? O judgment, thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason. When one reads Budget 2022, O judgment, thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason. I came here to the National Assembly to speak what I know, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Bishop Juan Edgell is an honorable man, and an honorable member who will no doubt regale us with thunderous sermonizing that this is the biggest budget ever, the biggest for his sector part, pinned at $76.7 billion for roads and bridges. Based on the track record of the two previous budgets and the dreams deferred, there is little hope this will be done. The PPP has demonstrated their skill set in solving the problems that persist and prevail in this society. A pothole, Mr. Speaker, on the Rumbelt Public Road demonstrates the PPP problem-solving abilities. The PPP encountered this pothole on the Rumbelt Public Road. Instead of fixing the problem with last year's biggest budget ever
and the year before that, biggest budget ever, they drew a line around it, ensuring that others will follow and not go into the pothole. In typical PPP fashion, when the obvious was pointed out, Minister Sonia Parag, the honorable member, was perhaps called in and attempted to Photoshop out the white line drawn along the problem. And when only enough public pressure was brought to bear on the issue, did the PPP choose to do the right thing and attempt to fix the problem. In my best crabman voice, pressure, bust pipe. Hence, Mr. Speaker, the PPP three-stage solution of problem solving. You draw a line around the problem, you Photoshop the problem, and only when public pressure is applied, you fix the problem. And yet, Mr. Speaker, these are all honorable men. Mr. Speaker, budget 2022, the biggest budget ever, is the PPP at stage 1. The budget 2022 is trying to draw a line around the problems that beset us as a country. Mr. Speaker, the minister within the office of the president with responsibility for finance, Dr. Ashley Singh, is perhaps the only person I know on the other side of the house who has not rehearsed this refrain with regularity. The biggest budget ever. We are certain that his accounting of things he has argued, size like height, doesn't matter, Mr. Speaker. I could hear Minister, the Honorable Onich Waldron, hurrying in to chime in, Mr. Speaker. Yes, yes, Comrade Ashley, a little Dutch axe can sabotage a whole ministry. But, Mr. Speaker, our colleagues are all honorable men. All honorable men. Mr. Speaker, the 2020 budget is the biggest ever. Carried the theme, our plan for prosperity, protecting the people. This is 2020 budget. A plan for prosperity, protecting the people in a COVID environment, strengthening democracy and the rule of law, incentivizing economic growth and job creation, and enhancing welfare. Mr. Speaker, in 2021, the budget theme, a path to recovery, economic dynamism, and resilience. And by the time we get to 2022, steadfast against all challenges, resolute in building our Guyana. Mr. Speaker, by 2022, the economic growth of the 2021 theme and the economic dynamism of the 2020 theme were all abandoned. But if I had to project, perhaps, Mr. Speaker, a non-oil growth of 6.1 and only achieve 4.6 after throwing two biggest budgets ever at that problem, I might abandon economic growth and economic dynamism as well. Mr. Speaker, Shakespeare reminds us, ambition should be made of sterner stuff. We cannot just abandon our budget's aim like that, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the honorable member with responsibility for finance within the office of the president is an honorable man. Mr. Speaker, in 2020, the lofty aim of protecting our people in a COVID-19 environment, that was the lofty aim. But we guess, Mr. Speaker, after 45,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19 and the current COVID surge, Mr. Speaker, 1,100 deaths plus, right? We will ease a little bit on protecting people in a COVID-19. So that has been abandoned as well as we get to 2022 in this budget. And how can we miss in that 2020 budget theme, creating jobs, Mr. Speaker, when according to the Guyana Bureau of Statistics, youth employment rate, the youth unemployment rate for the third quarter of 2021 was a recorded 31.9%, Mr. Speaker. We understand why the minister within the office of the president with responsibility for finance, Dr. Ashley Singh, would at this point just be drinking water and minding your own business. Stabrook News editorial of December 4th, 2021, perhaps captures the prevailing situation with the header for both budgets, 2020 and 2021, failure to launch. But then we come to 2022. This brings us frontally to the 2022 budget and the PPP's supposed new direction for the economy. Steadfast against all challenges, resolute in building one Guyana. Steadfast against all challenges could easily be the mantra of the masterminds behind the 3 freight of containers of arms and ammunition, Guyana bound and intercepted in Senegal. We steadfast against those challenges of being intercepted. We can see them saying to that other ship spotted in the South China Sea flying the Guyanese flag and illegally dealing in crude oil with Iran, we're steadfast against all challenges. The private sector commission had a so-called election observer deep in its rank who the American authorities were observing and later apprehended. He too was steadfast against all challenges. Mr. Speaker, Rahm Emanuel, the former mayor of Chicago, chief of staff of the Obama administration, he says you never let a crisis go to waste. And when one looks at the COVID governance of the PPP, it's a crisis that went to waste. Some of the things we could have been thinking about, Mr. Speaker, instead of lugging around suitcases of money to village after village, we could have been thinking about going against paperless cash, distributing bank cards so people could go to a bank ATM and putting a card and receive perhaps the monies that we're transferring to them in this COVID cash grant. But perhaps, Mr. Speaker, that would not lend to the kinds of corruption that goes along with this kind of COVID cash grant that is infamous. This crisis that COVID-19 has offered us could have had us planning, Mr. Speaker, planning to go to higher ground, sitting down with national planners, city planners, and planning for this nation. These are the experts of climate change, and we know what climate change is doing to higher sea levels. And we could have been sitting down collectively in this period and thinking about going to higher ground. And the whole idea of cash grants, Mr. Speaker, in the 2022 budget, one would have thought if the caring government that the PPP is would have really and truly relegated us to the opposition seat, they would have been giving monies to the people through this 2020 budget, through cash grants, again, in a very systematic way. But that has not been had. So the people of Guyana should understand that we're coming back. We are coming back. Instead, what is the picture before us? With the biggest budget ever. A little boy walking from Great Diamond to Diamond, looking for food. How does this biggest budget ever affect his life? 6 years old, and he's walking from Little Diamond to Great Diamond, hunting for food, bare feet, in an economy that produced 3 biggest budgets ever, yet none has touched his life thus far. The Mabaruma father, craving for a healthcare system that functions, who had to lift his son on his shoulder and walk through the streets of Mamarula because the health system, 3 biggest budgets later, continue to fail him. Continue to fail him. Young Jesus Hernandez, Mr. Speaker, lost his life because a colleague of his hit him in his head with a steel rod in this country. Hit him in his head with a steel rod. He approaches the police, and the police says to him, "This is a private matter. We cannot deal with it." Young Jesus Hernandez has lost his life. 13 years old, 3 biggest budgets ever, has never touched him, has never touched his family. We cannot forget the other aspects of this budget theme. Resolute in building one Guyana. Mr. Speaker, it is no secret Guyana has struggled over the years with a national airline and a flag carrier. But Resolute is the national cocaine carrier since August 2020, if the headlines in the local newspapers are to be believed. the national cocaine carrier, Resolute, are there. How can we forget, Mr. Speaker? 2 planes were found in September 15, 2020, with cocaine on board them in Region 7 at Isano, Cuyuni, Mazaruni. We cannot forget, Mr. Speaker, the Belgian police seized 11.5 tons of coke, 23,000 pounds of cocaine in a shipment from Guyana, November 5th, 2020. And yet in this government, they're all honorable men. We cannot forget a boat with dead people with no engine, about 83 nautical miles off Guyana shore, drifting at 2.9 knots, moving in a westerly direction, February 15, 2020. The honorable member, Juan Ejil, still chasing that boat. And yet, the honorable member, Juan Ejil, is an honorable man. There was a foreign aircraft, Mr. Speaker, with over 1,000 pounds of cocaine that crash landed at Oriala, Region 6, East Berbice Quarantine, May 21st, 2021. That's the national flag carrier, Cocaine Airlines. A burnt-out place was found on the trail of the Saruni area in Kokwani, believed to be involved in illegal activities. June 15, 2020, Caribbean Airlines plane intercepted in Miami with cocaine weighing approximately 3 kilograms. That flight started in Guyana. 2 foreign men, a Colombian and a Venezuelan, they were nabbed from a small plane that made an emergency landing at Madia, also carrying cocaine, November 4th, 2021. And then law enforcement in the Netherlands, intercepted a shipment of rum and coke. Jafar Ali would have a different meaning for the honorable member of this rum and coke, but it wasn't the same rum and coke that went to the Netherlands. 1,100 pounds of coke in rum. As I have mentioned, Mr. Speaker, the Guyana flag ship carrying 3 containers of arms and ammunition worth $5 million was intercepted in Dakar, January 20, 2020. A Guyana flagship again spotted in the South China Sea dealing with illegal crude oil from Iran. These guys, Mr. Speaker, seem very, very resolute. The only product, Mr. Speaker, the only sector, the only industry in this country soaring under the PPP is cocaine. And yet the noble Brutus, Mr. Speaker, according to the noble Brutus, all our colleagues here are honorable men. Mr. Speaker, even when you look at the big projects that are presented in Budget 2022, one wonders, if they're so good, why aren't they subjected to the same due diligence? Perhaps bringing in international investors as against having our own oil money funding those projects. If they're so good, why not submit them to the due diligence, to the gamut of due diligence? For instance, like an environmental impact assessment. It seems the reverse, that all projects do not need environmental impact assessments unless deemed otherwise. The New Harbor Bridge, they said, no EIA is needed. The oil exploration in the Kanji block, no EIA is needed. The oil to gas treatment facility at Corbedan, no EIA needed. The proposed Marriott branded hotel at Gutfawactin, no EIA needed. The 12 well exploration campaign of the offshore Kanji Kaichor block, rather, Mr. Speaker, no EIA needed. Superior Concrete, Mr. Speaker, company, no EIA needed. The government folks in the Tiger Rentals, Guyana waste treatment facility at Houston, no EIA needed. If all these projects are so good for Guyanese, why can't they be submitted to the same rigorous due diligence procedures, Mr. Speaker? If they're so good, it is the Canadian High Commission, the High Commissioner, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Mark Berman, who stressed the importance of these environmental impact assessments to this nation. He said, failure to undertake this type of due diligence could result in costly and harmful effects down the road. The importance, he went on, of understanding this legal framework which governs the environmental impact assessments cannot be overstated, and it is important that we continue to engage in improving our processes in keeping with the Environmental Protection Act. More so in the light of Guyana's new and developing petroleum sector, which brought with it the concerns about new and potential significant impacts on the environment. The EIAs should be done, but again, Mr. Speaker, the EIAs seem to be the contrary thing. You know, Mr. Speaker, there's a Turkish proverb that suggests when a clown moves into a palace, he doesn't become a king. The place just simply becomes a circus. Guyana has become that circus since August 2nd, 2020. It was under the David Granger-led administration and coalition that Guyana achieved its best ratings on the Transparency International Index. And yet these are all honorable men before us, Mr. Speaker. We were removed from the European Union and the Commonwealth blacklist for money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism, Mr. Speaker. And yet all these men before us are honorable men. We achieved our Tier 1 status, Mr. Speaker, for our fight against trafficking in persons, Mr. Speaker, under the David Granger-led administration. And it was under that administration the DA was allowed to return here after decades of efforts. Mr. Speaker, when International Anti-Corruption Day was held late last year, Sarah Ann Lynch, the American ambassador to Guyana, put out a press statement which serves as an indictment on this country and where we are, and which perhaps foreshadow things to come with our 2 points down on the International Corruption Perception Index. This was a foreshadower of things to come. In that press statement, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Ambassador Sarah Ann Lynch said to this government, the Biden administration is holding a virtual summit for democracy at which President Ali has confirmed his attendance. The United States is asking participating governments to announce meaningful commitments and initiatives to engage with civil society and the private and philanthropic sectors, since they play a critical role in supporting democracy, fighting corruption, and protecting human rights. The Honorable Minister went on to suggest she looked far back as 23 years before 2015. She couldn't find any measures put out there to fight corruption. And so she was forced to look between 2015 and 2020. And she found some. She said in 2018, the Guyana Public Service Commission was reconstituted after a 13-year hiatus. Mr. Speaker, this was a step towards ensuring fairness and transparency in the public service system. She went on to say, the Honorable Ambassador, that the government of Guyana also passed the Protected Disclosures Whistleblowers Act of 2018, which seeks to protect persons making disclosures from retributions and others, including within the public service. The Honorable Minister went on to say these kinds of legislative reforms are necessary parts of a successful plan to fight corruption. And yet sometimes we hear that Mr. Granger was ambitious. And from who? All of these honorable men. The Honorable Ambassador went on to state, Guyana and institutions around the globe cannot allow corruption to flourish. Cannot. And I hope my honorable colleague Onis Waldron is listening carefully, because she was the one who the honorable member suggested there was no evidence of corruption, no evidence of racism. But listen to Ambassador Sarah Lynch in this correspondence. Constructing a legislative framework that deters corrupt practices and promotes transparency is an essential step in addressing corruption. Enhancing the capabilities of criminal justice institutions to investigate and prosecute corruption is also crucial to exposing malign influence. And so we all watch, Mr. Speaker, the PS of the Amrinian Affairs Ministry and what becomes of that matter. We all watch with bated breath, Mr. Speaker. The Honorable Ambassador says government operations should be transparent such that citizens and the media can provide oversight and hold officials accountable. In this country, we are very concerned about who is called what and what as against holding officials accountable. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Ambassador went on to say procurement processes that comply with international anti-corruption standards will ensure a level playing field for investors. Private sector actors must also answer for any role that they play in corrupt practices. And when choosing private sector partners, it is advisable to choose the reputable over the most convenient. Most importantly, a robust civil society and free press are critical in holding leaders responsible. And she ends by saying this: we continue to look forward, as we do on the opposition side, we continue to look forward to the government's initiative to combat corruption, including the National Resource Fund legislation that offers both transparency and clear oversight to be a meaningful and inclusive process of stakeholder engagement. These are the words of the American ambassador, Mr. Speaker. And finally, the Honorable Ambassador says, a strong anti-corruption stance will show Guyanese citizens, I would insert here, with the largest budget ever yet again, will show Guyanese citizens and the rest of the world that the government is committed to transparent institutions that utilize the country's resources to the long-term benefit of all Guyanese, Mr. Speaker. But yet, Mr. Speaker, as one reads and interrogates the national budget that the Honorable Member Dr. Ashley Singh was courageous enough to bring to this House, one cannot help but to admit that all judgment, thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason, Mr. Speaker. But yet, all my colleagues on the other side are honorable men. Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. Honorable Members, I just want to first ask the Honorable Member, Mr. Duncan, to lay over the documents that he quoted the Excellencies as saying. Yeah. Thank you very much. I now call on the Honorable